Hi everyone, this is Professor Abby, your CTA 100 instructor. Um, just trying to touch base with all my class members. First of all, just making sure that everyone is doing okay, everyone's well and healthy, and let me wish you guys a happy Easter as well. Um, and wanting to, touch base with everyone, know how the course is going, how everyone is adapting to these new things that are, going on and that have kind of caused us to, have to do a lot more online learning as opposed to, our regular classroom learning. So I hope everything's going okay. Um, a few things about the course. I know that the 5G lab assignment is due today. I'm hoping everyone has been able to get to it. I do notice that many of us have not been able to get to the midweek discussion. So what I have done is extend the deadline for that till Tuesday. And I'm going to put all this in a general announcement as well. So you'll have this on Canvas as well. So the midweek discussion that we always have in class, usually, I've extended that till Tuesday so that everyone can catch up. I'm also going to be using that as a means of class registering class attendance. Since usually what we do in class, as you are all aware, is that we sign the class attendance form. Obviously, we can't do that with what's going on now. So what I'm going to do is use the midweek uh, discussion assignments that we do in class, where we go online and we go back and forth. Remember, where you have to have at least three responses with some one or two or even three other people in class. We'll use that as part of registering your attendance. I think that's the best that we can do with that at this time. All right, in terms of going over the chapters, remember I said one of the challenges that we probably would have is how to teach the chapter content, which is what I would usually do in class. What I figured that I'd start doing until we find something that's more effective is just go over the content. Like that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go over the content of chapter 8 on communications and networks. I'm just going to review it very quickly, probably in another, maybe 15 minutes, just go over the concepts that I think are worth expanding upon. And, that's what I think, the best way that we can kind of tackle this going forwards for now. So just think of it like I'm still in class teaching you guys, except that you cannot interrupt me. We've got to add some humor to this. That's the best that we can do. Okay. And the next chapter, which is going to be on chapter 9, which will be on privacy and security, I'm going to do the same thing. I do believe that sometime next week, at least once, I would definitely like us to meet on one of the online platforms, just so we can have some kind of face-to-face interaction. It's probably either going to be Zoom, or there's another platform that I have been experimenting with GoToMeeting, and there is another third one. This one's called Slack. It's not so much a video one, but it's more like an online Teams kind of thing. So we'll experiment with that as well. I'll let you guys know which one of the platforms that I intend to use that we can work with. So again, just going over some of the things that I've just said. The online discussions that were due yesterday for this past week, I have extended that till Tuesday. Okay, so I'd like you guys to go online and discuss this whole 5G thing. It's quite an interesting topic. There should be a lot that we have to discuss about that. So let's get that going so we don't miss out on the 50 points that are available for those online discussions. Remember what we talked about? Getting all those points up so you don't have to depend on the exam. Okay, so let's keep on doing that. Those 50 points are valuable. And of course, the end of week assignment is due today, really. So I'd like to know that you guys are, submitting that or are intending to submit that. And of course, we also have the end of week questions, those 20 questions that you have to do that are due on Sunday by midnight as well, which is today. Okay. And I'm going to go over chapter 8, communications and networks. And I will do the same thing for the upcoming chapter, chapter 9 as well. You're probably going to get that sooner, probably on Tuesday. I'll have an update, a video update for that as well. All right, let's get started with chapter 9. The learning objectives of chapter 9 are 1. Explaining connectivity, explaining what the wireless revolution is, and explaining communication systems. Second learning objective is describing physical and wireless communication channels. The third objective is differentiating between connection devices and services, which includes dial-up, DSL, cable, satellite, and cellular. The fourth objective is to describe the different types of data transmission factors, which includes, bandwidth, protocols. Remember, we have discussed some of these things. We have gone over a few of these concepts in the prior chapters, so nothing in this chapter should really be that strange, except that I might have to explain a few things a little bit further. Fifth objective is to define networks and key networking terminology, which includes network interface cards. I'm sure you guys remember the network interface cards, the NIC cards. We don't use them that much anymore, so they're not as common as they used to be maybe 10 years ago. But NIC cards used to be those cards that you would have to slide into a laptop in order to connect to the internet. Why don't we need them anymore? Well, manufacturers nowadays produce laptops with what's called internal wireless cards that are inside the systems themselves. So we don't need those external network interface cards anymore. But they were a part of part of what was produced in general, maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago. Okay. Sixth objective is describing the different types of networks. When we've been in class in the past, I've talked about local area networks, which I've typically described as LANs, LANs. And if you guys would remember, the way I described it was a local area network is one in which you could have, say, 20 computers, okay, that are in one classroom and that are linked to one printer, and those computers are able to print to that one printer. However, you cannot print to the printer that is in the other class because that is on a separate local area network. All right, so that's one way to think about it. All right, so that's a local area network. We're going to talk about it as I go through the chapter. We'll talk about the other types of networks. You have personal area networks, wide area networks, and metropolitan area networks. So we'll discuss that a little bit further. Seventh objective is describing network architectures. A lot of people don't know this, but when you're designing a network, it's almost like designing a building. In the sense that you have to take so many things into consideration before you put the network together. So let's look at it this way. The school says they need to put a network together, Arundel Community College. You're the network provider, designer, or whatever. Okay, you need to know, for instance, how many classrooms are there. You need to know how fast does the network have to be. How thick are the walls if it's going to be wireless networking? If it's going to be wired networking, you want to know how the classrooms are, pretty much put together so that you know how to create the cabling for that particular network. All right. So network architecture involves quite a lot. We'll dig a little bit more into that because there's some other terms that we need to be aware of. Network topology, network strategies, That's all linked to the overarching term of network architectures. And the eighth learning objective, but certainly not the least, is explaining the organizational issues that are related to internet technologies and network security. There's a lot of verbiage in there, but guys, pretty much what that is that when it comes to network security, there are a lot of organizational issues that need to be taken into account. Okay, how many people are there in the organization? We'll talk about something else called an intranet, separate from the internet. Okay, an intranet is an internet that exists within an organization. That's why you have, I'm going to use the school again, for example. All right, that's why you have at the end of everyone's emails, you have AACC. You know, mine is moab at aacc.edu. That means that anything that I send or receive within the school network on that internet address is being sent on the school's intranet, not the general internet. Okay, so there's a big distinction there. We'll delve into that a little bit as well. All right, so we covered the objectives. The first one and the main one again was explaining connectivity. My guess is with the weeks we spent studying the chapters in this class, we already know what connectivity is. All right. If you don't have connectivity, you will not be able to connect to the internet. All right. The second thing that first point discussed was the wireless revolution. That term we've bandied about quite a bit as well. So I'm assuming we all know what the wireless revolution is, but if you don't, it is the fact that everything that we have nowadays, your smartphone, your fridge, your radio, your car, is pretty much connected to the internet. That is the wireless revolution. Okay, the fact that we now have pretty much general commonplace connectivity with everything on the internet. Think about that when you're discussing 5G, okay, because that's a key concept. 5G would not really be possible if you didn't have this thing called the wireless revolution. All right, because the whole brouhaha about 5G and whether it's dangerous or whether it's not dangerous is the fact that everything is now connected wirelessly, even cars. Okay, even the clothes that people wear now have some kind of, or can, or do have the capability of being connected wirelessly. All right, so when you're talking about 5G on your assignment, don't forget to bring in the concept of the wireless revolution. All right, let's turn on to the other pages. Page 186 starts with just defining what communications is or are. We're told that email, texting, video conferencing, and even electronic commerce are part of what we would now term as our modern way of communicating. All right, so there's not too much there. We really don't need to dwell on too much there. It also talks about the concept of connectivity. The book says it's a concept that's related to using computer networks. We all know what computer networks are, okay? Remember the LAN, LAN, local area network. Remember the personal area network. We talked about that a couple of classes ago, what a personal area network is. Think about Bluetooth. When you activate your Bluetooth devices, you are creating a personal area network, usually not larger than 33 feet or so. That's one of the disadvantages of Bluetooth. You can't really take it too far. I've got my Bluetooth headphone on now, and if I take a telephone call and I walk down to my basement, I probably will not be able to take that call because of the range. Now, of course, some Bluetooth gadgets are higher in quality than others and have a much, wider range. And if you're fortunate and you get one of those, maybe you can get some reception in further than 33 feet. But I've even seen some Bluetooth devices where you have very much degraded reception with thick walls, for instance. Okay. All right. So we talked about connectivity. Page 187 talks again about the wireless revolution. It says that the single most dramatic change in connectivity and communications in the past decade has been the widespread use of smartphone devices like smartphones and tablets. Okay. Um, Again, just touching on this whole concept of the fact that everything is now connected wirelessly. You walk into a Best Buy, you're buying one of these brand new fridges. They will have the capability of you being able to turn them on or off, okay, over a wireless network. Now, remember, guys, one thing the book does in every chapter is bring up the subject of security. So, yes, wireless revolution, it's all nice, it's all good, but what happens to our security? The fact now that you now have medical devices, for instance, blood pressure monitors that can be monitored by a doctor at a doctor's office whilst you're halfway across the world. That's all well and good, very convenient. But what if someone's able to hack in wirelessly um, and then, compromise your health information, you know? So that is, that's the converse of being able to have this convenience of the wireless revolution, and at the same time we are prone to security hacks as well. So when you're discussing that in the assignment, do not forget to add the fact that there are compromises in terms of security as well, and discuss that. Discuss. Make sure you discuss those points as well, so you can flesh out um, your points in the assignment. All right. The book also talks about communication systems, goes a little bit into sending and receiving devices and connection devices. When the book goes down this road, it really is emphasizing modems, okay? Different types of modems, the fact that when you're connected to the internet, you must, or at least as of right now, you must have a modem to connect to the internet, whether you're connecting via wired form or wireless forms. Okay. All right, let's turn over to page 188. And as you guys already know, I don't always go into the nitty gritty of each chapter. That would be just wasting time. But what I like to do is do an overview so that you guys have a general idea. And I just pick out the bits and pieces that I think are necessary for you to understand the chapter. Okay. All right. Book talks about data transmission specifications, and it says that these are rules and procedures that coordinate the sending and receiving devices by defining how the message will be sent. All right. We've talked about a term that I introduced to you guys probably about 2 chapters ago called TCP/IP. Let's take a walk back to when we started, and we kind of talked about the different when the internet started, for example, and they were attempting to see how computers would be able to understand each other when when messages were sent from one computer to the other. The problem at that time was that there was no uniform language for computers. The Russians had separate protocols. The Americans had their own protocol, and probably I think the Europeans had something else that they were trying to introduce. All right. The Americans came up with TCP/IP, and TCP/IP kind of won over because it was, let's just say, it was easier to introduce to the computers at the time. So TCP/IP over time became the standard communication protocol so that computers could understand each other over the internet. All right. So when the book talks about data transmission specifications, just think TCP/IP. All right. All right. On page 188 again, here we have communication channels, different types of communication channels. What the book tries to do here is differentiate between wireless communication channels and the physical communication channels. So think about this. You've got cable in your home or cable service in your home, all right? You know those wires that you have to connect your TV and your transmission boxes to. It's usually white, okay? Those are your cable connection pieces. Um, let's go through these three different types. The first one here is twisted pair cable. Now, twisted pair is the really first type of cable that was used to connect to the internet. Think more telephone lines, regular telephone lines, okay? At that time, when you had to connect to the internet, you had to use a telephone line or twisted pair cable. It was extremely slow, okay, or even though to us at the time it was fast because it was novel, okay. um, but that's what was available at the time. Now, over time, that kind of evolved. There was an evolution to what was now called coaxial cable. This is most commonly what you're seeing in homes nowadays. It's that white cable that you can screw into the back of a TV or into the back of I guess, a cable box. All right, that's called coaxial cable. Difference is between those two, between twisted pair and coaxial, is coaxial cable is able to handle a lot more data than twisted pair cable. That's very evident by the fact that no one uses twisted pair cable to access the internet anymore. Mhm. Now, the third option, when we talk about physical connections here, is fiber optic cable. This is where things improve dramatically, guys. The fact that now, using fiber optic cable, we're able to watch high definition TV. We're able to download video content in almost instantaneously. If we did not have fiber optic cable, that would not be possible. So fiber optic cable transmits data as pulses of light through tiny tubes of glass. Right? Big difference in technology. That's why it's able to transmit data so fast. Actually, Verizon was one of the first companies to introduce widespread fiber optic cable for their service. It does make a bit of a difference. I think the downside that I noticed with Verizon is they had to pretty much dig fiber optic cable into the ground to make it usable. So it took a longer time to get it operational. And even then, right now, I'm still not seeing as fast speeds as they have been advertising with Fios or fiber optic cable. I mean, I've used Comcast, which uses a regular coaxial cable, and I'm now using Fios using fiber optic cable, and I don't know that I am seeing the difference in speeds that Verizon is saying we should be seeing. But who knows? Maybe in some areas that might be different. I can't say for sure. Or maybe in some regions that might be different. I definitely can't say for sure. Okay. All right. So just to do a quick rundown of that: twisted physical connections, twisted pair cable, coaxial cable, and fiber optic cable. Now let's take a look at wireless communications. Let's see what the book says about that. And that's on page 189. All right. So different types of wireless communications. The book talks about Bluetooth. We've already discussed what Bluetooth is. It is a type of short range radio communication. Wi-Fi, which is called wireless fidelity, okay, uses high frequency radio signals. And microwave communication uses high frequency radio waves. There's something else called WiMAX, which is worldwide interoperability for microwave access. It's quite a mouthful. This is not really used, I would say, individually. I've seen it more in cinemas. If you've gone into some of these cinemas these days, you'll see some advertising WiMAX. Supposed to be better sound and better pictures, and of course they charge you more for it. I don't know that the experience is worth the cost, but it's out there. So, there you have it. Cellular communication uses multiple antennas called cell towers. We would not be able to make telephone calls if we didn't have cellular technology with these different cell towers. When I started using T-Mobile years ago, they had limited cell towers. And what would happen is you'd be driving from, say, Maryland to maybe North Carolina, and as you were driving, all of a sudden your calls would drop because T-Mobile at the time didn't have enough cell towers outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And so what would happen is you'd have to hop onto another carrier's cell towers like Verizon and then pay extra money for that. Of course, that's changed now. T-Mobile is probably has the most coverage in the entire nation, so that's been a big jump. But cell towers are definitely important, and that's what cellular technology uses. And of course, with 5G coming along, 5G is going to be using those cell towers as well. Now, one of the fears is that with the added micro radiation that's going to be produced by 5G, will that be harmful to people? Okay, well, that's another subject altogether. All right, we've talked about Bluetooth, we've talked about Wi-Fi, we've talked about microwave communication, we've talked about WiMAX, we've talked about cellular. Satellite communication is another one, okay? This used to be quite commonly used in the early 2000s and even the late 90s. And what it was, I don't know if you guys have ever watched any of those old narco movies, where they showed the narco criminals in Colombia using the satellite phones, all right? Very expensive at the time, but that's what they used. Probably cost, who knows, maybe $100 a minute to make a call using those. But that's because it used technology that was based on satellite communications, all right? And that's what made it so expensive as well. It's still available, still being used, still effective, but of course it's costly, and we have a lot more cost-efficient methods to communicate in this day and age. Now, your GPS that you use for your car navigation still depends on satellite technology. All right, so that's one area that, or one thing that you satellite technology is extremely good for. All right, now let's turn over to page 190. Infrared, another type of communication. Infrared waves. This uses infrared light waves to communicate over short distances. Think more of your TV, what's it called now? Your TV remote control. That uses infrared rays. What distinguishes that from other types of wireless communications is the fact that it is what's called a line of sight communication, meaning that, if you've ever used if you do use your TV remote controls, you notice that if you move maybe too far to the right or too far to the left and you're not directly in front of the TV, it's not going to work. And that's because infrared rays use what's called a line of sight communication. That's its limitation. Okay. All right. The word modem is short for modulator demodulator. Modulation is the name of the process of converting from digital to analog, and demodulation is the process of converting from analog to digital. Modems work with they have what's called transmission speeds, and each modem is capable of higher or lower transmission speeds. This speed is also called the transfer rate, and it's typically measured in what's called millions of bits. Okay, so it could be megabits per second. So if you're being sold a modem by someone at Best Buy, they might want to tell you, hey, this is the best modem out here now, and it transmits at 10 million megabits per second, meaning that's how fast it is. Okay. There are other types of modems, DSL, digital subscriber line. This used to be very common in the early 2000s, late 90s, DSL. After the original way of communicating with the internet, where you could, link to the internet by telephone or twisted pair cable, after that came DSL. And at the time was considered pretty fast because, it was the next best thing after DSL. But of course, that was quickly overtaken by cable modems, okay, which are way, way faster than DSL. So DSL now is pretty much non-existent. I don't see much of them around anymore, but I guess they're in the book, so we can reference them, okay. And of course, we now have wireless modems, which in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, were not that common. Most people at that time still had wired modems. Now we have wireless modems, and they appear to be the most common thing ever because they're just so convenient. And the technology has also gotten a lot better as well. Okay. All right, let's turn over to page 191. I don't think there's too much we're going to dwell on this page because we pretty much discussed most things here. It talks about cellular service providers, different types of ones. It also, however, talks about the different types of generations in the cellular technology. So we started off with 1G, and then we moved on to 2G. 1G was pretty much analog. Okay, 2G became digital, and of course 3G and 4G, and as we all know now we're at 5G. So that's what we pretty much need to know about that. All right, turning over to, I'm going to skip those middle pages. It says making IT work for you. We don't really need that. Let's talk a little bit about bandwidth. Okay, bandwidth is the measurement of the width or the capacity of the communication channel. All right, let's break it down to more layman's language. Verizon tells you that, with Fios, you can download 10 movies within the space of 5 minutes. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but let's say they say that. What they're effectively telling you is that the bandwidth of the technology that they're using is so much bigger, better, greater than the bandwidth that Comcast uses. That's pretty much what that means. So your bandwidth is a measurement of the width or the capacity of the communication channel. Fios has a higher bandwidth than, for instance, the technology that Comcast uses. So fiber optic cable, has a higher bandwidth than, say, twisted pair cable or regular cable. Okay. Different types of bandwidth here. There are 4 categories. There's voice band, there's medium band, there's broadband, which is mostly what we use right now, and there is baseband. So let's run through that again. There is voice band, there is medium band, there is broadband, and there is baseband. The book also now comes and talks about the different types of protocols. I've already covered that. I talked about TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, and I gave you guys a history how that came about when computers were just when we were beginning to enter this phase of the internet back in the 60s. They needed some kind of medium with which computers could understand each other, computers could identify each other rather, and TCP/IP became the main language with which computers over the world could identify each other. All right. Let's see. On page 195, talks about packetization. So let's explain what that is. When an email is sent out from a computer, it's almost like the message is descrambled. Think about it like this. A packet of, say, noodles in one packet is being sent to someone, across the street. And before it gets there, what needs to happen is for the contents of that packet to be completely removed, shifted around, put together, Once it gets to its destination, it's put back together again, okay, and delivered to the sender. That's the whole concept of packetization. It's hard to understand why it's necessary, but that's how messages are sent. As a matter of fact, that's how encryption occurs. If you didn't have packetization, you couldn't have messages be encrypted for security procedures as well. Okay, so for the purposes of the book and for the lesson, just understand it that way. The packetization means that the message is descrambled before it's sent out, and then when it gets to the sender, it's scrambled, put together again before it's delivered. Networks. We're still on page 195. Description of what a node, a client, or a server is. Well, a node is pretty much any device that is connected to a network. Think about your Roku box or your Amazon Fire Stick or your Xbox. Anything that's connected to a network is called a node. A client is a node that requests and uses resources from other nodes. Okay, so your computer, if you got your computer on and you have to print, your computer could be considered to be a client because it is requesting resources from your printer, from maybe even your TV or something like that. Okay. A server is a node that shares resources with other nodes. Okay, so there's something called a print server, for instance. A print server allows other printers on the network to print different content from the other computers, right? So a print server shares, it gives out. A client node makes requests. All right, let's turn over to page, let's see, we're going to skip page 196. Let's go on to page 197. Page 197 talks again about different types of network types, local area networks, for instance. I want you to remember this term. It's called a network gateway. So remember how we talked about how in the class that we usually meet, what we have there is a local area network, meaning that each computer on that network can only print to one printer. All right. Remember how I explained, and I think I did explain this. If I didn't, then I'm explaining it again, that in the adjoining class, that's considered to be a separate network. However, you could join that network if you had a tool, something that's called a network gateway. A network gateway enables two different networks to communicate with each other. Okay? So that's what that is. Turning over to page 198. There's some talk here about a wireless local area network. All that means, guys, it's the same as a regular local area network. Same as what we have in class, except that it's not wired, it is wireless. So that's the only distinction between a wireless local area network and a regular local area network. I already talked about the personal area network, excuse me, and I used the example of Bluetooth. The fact that you cannot probably go beyond 33 feet, okay? A metropolitan area network is slightly different. I want you to think more like, for instance, Starbucks. Different buildings that have Starbucks across a major city. Washington, D.C., for instance. In that instance, anytime you walked in and you used a wireless networking facility there, you're probably using a metropolitan area network. Next type of network we're talking about is a wide area network called a WAN, W-A-N. This is more, geographically, this is more like, could be spread across different countries, different regions, and we typically see this more like with the military. The Pentagon, for instance, might have different stations across the world where they need to have a wide area network called a WAN, W-A-N. All right, we already talked about network architecture. Um, this describes how a network is arranged and how resources are coordinated and shared. I use the example, for instance, of Arundel Community College. Someone's coming in to design a network, or they've been asked to design a network. They would have to take into consideration a huge number of things. One, how many students there are, how many classrooms there are, how's the network going to be laid out, how thick are the walls, if it's wireless technology, for instance, if it's wired technology, where all the wires going to be, so on and so forth. So that's the whole idea behind network architecture. Um, all right, we have talked about firewalls in the past, and my assumption is that we know what a firewall is, but you know, if your computer's on, whether it's at home or whether it's at school, and it's wireless, it would typically have what's called a firewall to stop intruders from coming into your network. Now, the truth is this: firewalls really don't really do that much, but what they do in reality is they discourage intruders from coming in. In other words, it just takes them more time to get into the system. And any hacker worth his salt wants to get in and get out as fast as he or she can. Okay? All right. Let's move over. Uh, Different types of topologies. Now, remember when we talked about network architecture? There's another term that's linked to network architecture is network topologies. That just says how is a network laid out. I probably don't have enough time to explain all that online now, but I do want you guys to look at page 200 on the newer book, chapter 8, where it talks about different types of network topologies. And you can read through that and just get a feel for what the different types of network topologies are, how they're laid out, and how they might impact or affect sharing resources in a network. Um, Page 201 talks about organizational networks. I've already mentioned this, what an intranet is. Okay, that's like an internal private network within an organization. Um, and an extranet is a private network that connects more than one organization. So one way to look at that is, for instance, take Arundel Community College. We have an intranet. That's how we send our internal emails. That's why every student is able to have, Michael Abbey at aacc.edu. That, the fact that we have an intranet makes that possible. An extranet, you're probably talking something like the military or the US federal government. Okay, the fact that we have different intranets in maybe different countries, but that are still linked to one another. Okay. Um, Intrusion detection systems, these are probably, I would say, firewalls on steroids. All right. These are systems that are placed in organizations where anytime there's an intrusion by, say, a hacker, it will detect what's going on and pretty much hopefully put a stop to it. They're called intrusion detection systems. A virtual private network, a VPN. Let me give a practical demonstration of this. Let's say you got a job and you're told that you can only do that job from home, and but that you would have to access your company's servers from your home. 9 times out of 10, the only way they're going to be able to make that possible is create a virtual private network for you. Okay, it's almost as if you are on site. It's secure, it's private, but you're able to access the office networks from your home office, and it's typically called a virtual private network. That's what that is. So, in order for you to understand the concept, it's pretty simple. You can access the organization's servers from home or from anywhere else. Obviously, the security level is quite high for these. I know that the federal government uses this quite a lot, and so does the military as well. And you would not be able to have secure remote access if you didn't have virtual private networks. All right, we pretty much covered that chapter, and like I said before, I'll do the same for chapter 9. I'm going to do a quick review that should be available on Tuesday. I have extended the time frame for the midweek online discussions, and then of course tonight is the deadline for the lab assignment. But of course, do have till technically you do have till tomorrow, except that if it's not submitted tonight, you get docked, a late some late points as well. Um, I'm available. Email me if you have any questions. Let me know if you have any connectivity issues. Um, Remember that we'll get through this. So, but we will do our best to get through the content of the course, and I guess the best way possible as well. Remember, like I said, I'm going to be using the midweek discussions to as a means of having us log in and do our attendance. So that's important. So do your best to do those midweek assignments and do them on time. I give you guys a number of days to get those done anyway. So I'm hoping that shouldn't be a problem as well. Remember, you have to go back and forth with, at least 2 or 3 times for it to be recorded as a conversation. Okay, all right. So thanks. I hope this has been useful. Remember, I'm going to try to log in using either Zoom or one of those content providers this coming week, but I'll give you guys more of those details probably sometime tomorrow. Thanks. Have a wonderful Easter, and it's been a pleasure.